My name is Frank Peterson. I'm 58 years old, and for 34 of those years, I've worked as a land surveyor for a utility cooperative in the Pacific Northwest. My job is to walk lines, check easements, and mark boundaries for new infrastructure. It's a job that takes me to places most people only see on postcards, and a lot of places they wouldn't even want to. I've spent more time in the deep woods, miles from any paved road, than I have in my own living room. I'm telling you this not to brag, but to establish a baseline. I know the woods. I know the animals that live there. I know the difference between a deer track and an elk track, the sound of a cougar screaming versus a fox, the smell of a bear den versus a deadfall rot. I'm not some city guy who gets spooked by an owl. I'm comfortable out there. Or at least, I was. What I'm about to tell you happened in the late fall of 2011, on a Tuesday. I remember it was a Tuesday because that was trash day, and I'd forgotten to take the bins out before I left. It's a stupid detail, but it's the kind of thing that sticks. It's the last normal, mundane thought I had before everything changed. I've told this story exactly 3 times in my life. Once to my wife, once to a sheriff's deputy who thought I was drunk, and once to a priest who told me the world was full of mysteries. None of them really heard me. Now I'm telling it to you. I'm not looking for belief, not anymore. I just feel like I have a responsibility to put it on the record, to bear witness. Before I get into what happened, if you're new here, consider subscribing. I share stories like this regularly. And drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I always like to know who's listening. All right, let me tell you what happened up on that logging spur off the Kilchis River. It was a place where the trees are so thick they blot out the sun at noon, and the silence is so heavy it feels like a weight on your ears. The job that day was simple enough. A proposed route for a new high-voltage line needed to be plotted through a section of state-managed forest that hadn't been logged in 50 years. It was rugged country, the kind of place where the map shows a road, but reality gives you 2 ruts and a prayer. I had my Ford F-250, the one the co-op owned, packed with my tripod, my total station, and a cooler with a ham sandwich and 2 bottles of water. The weather was typical for October in that part of Oregon. Low, gray clouds spitting a persistent, misty rain that wasn't heavy enough for full rain gear, but just wet enough to soak you to the bone over a few hours. The temperature hovered in the low 40s. I drove about 12 miles up a gravel road, then turned onto the spur, which was more mud than dirt. The truck handled it fine. I parked at a washout where a winter storm had taken out a culvert years ago. From there, it was on foot. The air smelled of damp earth, wet cedar, and that clean, sharp scent of decay that's always present in an old-growth forest. It's a smell I've always found comforting. That day, it just felt cold. I grabbed my gear, slung the rifle over my shoulder, a standard .30-06, more for peace of mind than anything. In 30 years, I'd never had to use it on anything bigger than a particularly stubborn stump, and started walking the survey line. The plan was to go in about 2 miles, set my points, and be back at the truck before 3. It was a short day, an easy day. The first hour was completely normal. I heard the usual chatter of Steller's jays, the drumming of a woodpecker somewhere off to my right. I saw fresh elk sign, the big cloven hoofprints pressed deep into the mud. Everything was as it should be. The first hint that something was off was the silence. It didn't happen all at once. It was a gradual fading, like someone was slowly turning down the volume on the world. The woodpecker stopped. Then the jays went quiet. Soon, the only sounds were my own boots sucking in the mud and the drip of water from the fir boughs overhead. This is something you learn to notice in the woods. Absolute silence is rare, and it's almost never a good sign. It means a predator is moving, a big one. My first thought naturally was cougar, or maybe a bear. I slowed my pace, pulled my rifle around to hold it at a low ready, and started scanning the trees. My head was on a swivel. The feeling of being watched started to creep in. It's a cliché, I know, but it's real. It's a prickling on the back of your neck, a sudden awareness of your own breathing. Your brain is telling you that other eyes are on you, even if you can't see them. I kept telling myself it was a mountain lion. They're masters of stealth.
You can walk right past one 10 feet away and never know it.
That thought was unsettling, but it was a known quantity. It fit inside the box of my experience. I stood there for a good 5 minutes, motionless, just listening and watching. The silence held. It was profound. Not a squirrel, not a chipmunk, not even the rustle of a field mouse in the undergrowth. The woods had gone dead. It felt like they were holding their breath. I considered turning back. The smart play, when you feel like this, is to trust your gut and get back to the truck. But I had a job to do, and I was only about a half-mile from my final survey point. Stubbornness, I guess. Or maybe just the habit of a working man who finishes what he starts. I told myself I was being jumpy, an old man spooking at shadows. So I pushed on, but my posture had changed. I was walking crouched a little, trying to make less noise, my thumb resting on the safety of the rifle.
The path I was following, the ghost of an old logging trail, dipped down into a shallow ravine. A small, seasonal creek trickled through the bottom, choked with ferns and skunk cabbage. It was maybe 15 feet deep, the sides steep and slick with wet clay and mossy rocks. As I started to pick my way down the bank, I caught the smell. It wasn't bear. I know bear smell. It's a heavy, greasy, musky odor. This was different. It was sharp, acrid, like wet dog mixed with something else. Something coppery and vaguely like garbage left in the sun too long. It was foul, and it made the hairs on my arms stand up. The smell was coming from the bottom of the ravine, and with it, another sound started to break the silence. It was a soft, high-pitched noise. A whimper. It was a sound of pain, thin and pathetic. My brain, trying to make sense of it all, immediately jumped to the most logical conclusion. A dog. Someone had dumped a dog out here, or maybe a coyote had gotten caught in a poacher's trap. I've found animals in traps before. It's a miserable thing. Despite the unease, my focus shifted. The feeling of being hunted was replaced by a sense of duty. If an animal was suffering, I couldn't just walk away. I moved down the slope more quickly, my boots sliding in the mud. The whimpering got a little louder, more insistent. The smell got stronger. It was thick in the air now, coating the back of my throat. I reached the bottom of the ravine and peered through a thicket of salmonberry bushes. There, lying in the muddy ditch next to the creek, was the source of the sound. It was curled into a tight ball, shivering violently. At first glance, it looked like a German Shepherd puppy, but way too big. It had coarse, dark gray fur, almost black, matted with mud and what looked like blood. But as I watched, it uncurled slightly, and my brain stuttered. The proportions were all wrong. My first thought, and I know how this sounds, was that it was a person in some kind of elaborate costume. Maybe a prank, or some kind of weirdo living out in the woods. But that idea fell apart as soon as I got a clearer look. It was lying on its side, and I could see its rib cage heaving with each ragged breath.
One of its back legs was bent at a sickeningly unnatural angle, the bone clearly broken and jutting through the skin and fur. That's where the blood was coming from. It wasn't a costume. This thing was alive, and it was badly hurt. It shifted again, trying to get comfortable, and lifted its head. That's when my blood ran cold. The head was canine, yes. It had the long snout and pointed ears of a wolf or a shepherd. But the face wasn't right. The eyes were set forward, not on the sides of its head like a dog's. They were a pale, almost yellow color, and they were filled with a terrifying combination of pain and intelligence. They weren't animal eyes. They looked at me, and I felt seen. It let out another whimper, and I saw its teeth. They were too long, too sharp. Then it moved its front paws, or arms, or whatever they were. It pushed itself up slightly, and I saw its hands. I have to call them hands. They weren't paws. They had long, claw-tipped fingers and an opposable thumb. It used them to try and brace itself, the movement clumsy with pain but undeniably deliberate. I just stood there, frozen, my rifle feeling impossibly heavy in my hands. My mind was scrambling, trying to fit what I was seeing into some kind of logical box. Diseased coyote? A rare genetic mutation? A bear cub with mange? None of it fit. Nothing has hands like that. The thing was maybe the size of a large dog, maybe 60 or 70 pounds. It was clearly young, a juvenile of whatever it was. It looked at me, its yellow eyes wide with fear and pain, and let out a low, guttural noise that was half whimper, half growl. It was a sound of pure misery, and against every instinct screaming at me to run, I felt a pang of something I can only describe as pity. It was a young thing, hurt and alone. Whatever it was suffering. I took a half step forward, and it flinched, dragging its broken leg and trying to scrabble away, whining in agony. I stopped. I said, out loud, my voice sounding thin and stupid in the silence, "Easy there. I'm not going to hurt you." I don't know why I said it. It's what you say to a scared dog. And in that moment, that's what my brain needed it to be. Just a scared, weird-looking dog. I slowly unslung my rifle and leaned it against a tree. I wanted to show it I wasn't a threat. I held my empty hands out, palms forward. "It's okay," I said, my voice still shaky. "It's okay." I took another slow step. My mind was working on a new track now. Maybe I could help it. Splint the leg, or at least get it some water. It was a stupid, dangerous thought, but the sight of its suffering was overwhelming. It was just a baby. The standoff lasted for what felt like an eternity. It was probably only a minute or two. I stood there, hands out, talking to it in a low, calm voice. It watched my every move, its yellow eyes never leaving my face. The whimpering subsided into ragged, shallow breathing. It was exhausted. I could see the tension in its shoulders, the way its muscles bunched under its dark fur. It was ready to fight if it had to, but it didn't have much left. I thought about my water bottles. I thought about the first aid kit in my pack, the roll of duct tape I always carry. I could rig a crude splint. I could give it a drink. My brain was so focused on the problem in front of me, the injured creature, that I had completely forgotten about the bigger problem. I had forgotten why the woods went silent in the first place. That was my mistake, and it almost cost me my life. The change was subtle at first, a shift in the air. The smell I'd noticed earlier came back, but this time it was 100 times stronger. A wave of wet dog, rot, and raw, bloody meat washed over me, so thick I gagged. The little one in the ditch seemed to sense it too. It went rigid, and a new sound came from its throat, a low, desperate chirping noise, almost like a bird. It was calling for something. My head snapped up. I scanned the top of the ravine, the direction I'd come from. The dense wall of green and gray was unchanged, but the feeling of being watched was back, and it was no longer a vague prickling. It was a physical pressure, a certainty that something huge and hostile was staring right at me. I slowly started to back away, reaching for the rifle I'd so foolishly set aside. My eyes were locked on the ridgeline. And then I saw it. It wasn't a sudden appearance. It was more like my eyes finally adjusted to see what had been there all along. A shape detached itself from the shadows beneath a massive Douglas fir.
A shape that was too tall, too broad. It rose to its full height, and my breath caught in my chest. It was huge, easily 7, maybe 8 feet tall. It stood on 2 legs, slightly hunched, its powerful form silhouetted against the gray sky. It was covered in the same coarse, dark fur as the little one, but thicker, shaggier. Its head was the same nightmare fusion of wolf and man, with a long, heavy snout and pointed ears that twitched, sampling the air. Powerful shoulders sloped down to long, muscular arms that ended in those same terrifying 5-fingered hands, with claws that looked like black, curved knives. It just stood there on the edge of the ravine, looking down at me. And then its eyes found mine. They were the same pale, intelligent yellow as the juveniles, but there was no pain or fear in them. There was only cold, absolute appraisal, and a bottomless, ancient malevolence. This was the mother. Time seemed to slow down, to stretch like taffy.
Every detail burned itself into my memory. The way the mist collected in the matted fur on her shoulders, the muscles in her thighs, bunching and relaxing under the skin as she shifted her weight. Her chest, broad and deep, rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. I could see her nostrils flare as she tasted my scent on the air. She didn't growl, not at first. She just watched me, her head tilted slightly, as if she were trying to solve a puzzle. The puzzle was me. What was I? What was I doing near her young? The little one in the ditch started its chirping noise again, louder this time, more insistent. The mother's gaze flickered down to it, then back to me. A low rumble started in her chest, a sound so deep I felt it in my own bones, more than I heard it with my ears. It was the sound of a landslide starting miles away. It was a promise of violence. My hand was inches from my rifle. I could grab it. I could try to get a shot off, but I knew, with a certainty that was absolute, that I would never be fast enough. She was maybe 40 feet away, with a 15-foot drop between us. To her, that was nothing. One leap, and she would be on me. My life was balanced on a razor's edge, and it all depended on what she decided to do next. My brain, bless its stupid, stubborn heart, was still trying to rationalize. It was a bear. A big, weird-looking bear standing on its hind legs. But bears don't have canine snouts. They don't have hands. Their eyes don't hold that kind of calculating intelligence. This was not a bear. This was something else entirely, something that had no place in the world I knew. She took a step forward, to the very edge of the ravine. A little cascade of mud and pebbles tumbled down the slope. She lowered her head, and for the first time, I saw her teeth clearly as her lips peeled back in a silent snarl. They were long and yellowed, a mix of sharp canines and heavy, crushing molars.
The kind of teeth designed to snap bone and tear flesh. The rumbling in her chest grew louder. I was going to die. That was the only thought in my head. I was going to die out here in the mud and the rain, and no one would ever know what happened. They'd find my gear,
Maybe some scattered remains if the scavengers left anything. They'd say a bear got me, or a cougar. Case closed. I was trembling, but not from the cold. A part of me, the part that had faced down angry loggers and belligerent landowners, wanted to scream, to charge, to do something. But the primal lizard part of my brain had taken over. It knew I was prey. All I could do was stand there frozen, waiting for the pounce. And then the unexpected happened. She didn't leap. She didn't charge. She looked from me to her injured child and back to me. Her gaze was intense, analytical. She saw my rifle leaning against the tree out of my hands. She saw my open, empty palms. She saw that I was standing between her and her baby, but I wasn't making any aggressive moves toward it. Her snarl lessened, the lips lowering slightly, though the low growl continued. Then she did something that shattered the last of my composure. She took one of her huge, clawed hands and made a gesture. It was a short, sharp, sideways flick of her head and a slight beckoning motion with her fingers. It was a universal, unmistakable command. Get out of the way. The command was so clear, so intelligent, that it broke my paralysis. I didn't think. I just reacted. I scrambled backwards, stumbling over a root, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I moved sideways, clearing a path between her and the ditch. I put a thick, moss-covered log between myself and the bottom of the ravine. I was trying to make myself smaller, less of a threat, pressing myself into the landscape. The mother watched me move, her yellow eyes tracking every twitch. The moment I was clear, she acted. It wasn't a frantic leap, it was a controlled, fluid descent. She dropped onto all fours, the movement shockingly graceful for a creature so large and powerful, and half slid, half climbed down the steep, muddy bank. She landed silently at the bottom, her huge form dwarfing the injured juvenile. She immediately went to the little one, nudging it with her long snout, making a series of soft, guttural clicking sounds. It was the most bizarre and terrifyingly tender thing I have ever witnessed. She was comforting it. She licked the blood from the fur around its broken leg, her long, gray tongue surprisingly gentle. The juvenile whimpered and pressed against her massive chest. She spent maybe 10 seconds assessing the injury, her nose twitching, her ears swiveling, constantly checking my position. She never took her attention off me completely. I was still a variable, an unknown threat. Then, with a motion that was all brutal strength and efficiency, she bent down, gripped the scruff of the smaller one's neck in her massive jaws, and stood up. She lifted its 60 or 70-pound body as if it weighed nothing. The juvenile went limp, its broken leg dangling uselessly. She turned, and for a final, heart-stopping moment, she looked directly at me. The growl was gone. Her expression, and it was an expression, I swear it, was unreadable. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't mercy. It was a dismissal. It was the look you might give an insect on the wall. You are beneath my notice. You are irrelevant. You are alive only because I have more important things to do than kill you. And in that look, there was also a clear, unspoken warning. You are not here. You did not see this. Do not come back. Then she turned away. In 2 massive bounds, she was up the other side of the ravine, the side I hadn't come down, and vanished into the impenetrable wall of trees and shadow. There was no sound, no snapping branches, no rustling leaves. One moment, this 8-foot-tall nightmare was there, and the next, she was simply gone. The silence she left behind was heavier, more profound than the silence that had preceded her. It was a vacuum. For a long time, I didn't move. I stayed pressed against my log, listening. The only sound was the frantic drumming of my own heart and the steady drip, drip, drip of water from the trees. My body started to shake uncontrollably. It was the adrenaline crash. My teeth chattered and my legs felt like they were made of wet cement. I finally managed to push myself up, my movements stiff and jerky. I grabbed my rifle. The cold steel felt solid, real, a connection to the world I understood. I looked down into the ditch. There was a depression in the mud where the little one had been lying. A few dark splotches of blood were already being diluted by the rain. And there were tracks. They were huge, a bizarre mix of canine and primate. A long, dog-like pad with 5 distinct toe prints, the deep punctures of the claws clearly visible ahead of them. I backed away from the edge of the ravine, slowly, my rifle up, scanning the trees, the shadows, everywhere. Every dark space between the trunks looked like a monster. Every gust of wind sounded like a growl. My job, my survey points, my equipment, none of it mattered. The only thought in my head was truck. I had to get back to my truck. I turned and started moving, not running, but walking as fast as I could without falling on the slick ground. I didn't look back. I was too afraid of what I might see. The half-mile back to where I'd left my gear felt like 10. I kept expecting to feel claws in my back, to hear that terrifying, bone-deep rumble behind me. The woods no longer felt empty. They felt occupied. I felt like a trespasser in a place where I was not welcome, a place I had never truly understood. I finally reached the spot where I'd left my tripod and total station. I didn't even hesitate. I left it all there. Thousands of dollars of equipment just sitting on the forest floor. I couldn't bring myself to stop, to take the time to pack it up. I just kept moving. The walk back to the truck was the longest hour of my life. The silence was still absolute. Nothing moved, nothing made a sound. It was as if the entire forest was still holding its breath, waiting for me to leave. I finally saw it through the trees, the dull white of the Ford F-250. It was the most beautiful sight I had ever seen. It was civilization. It was safety. I broke into a clumsy, stumbling run, fumbling in my pocket for the keys. My hands were shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to get the key in the lock. I threw the door open, tossed my rifle on the passenger seat, and scrambled inside, slamming and locking the door behind me. I sat there for a moment, my back pressed against the seat, gasping for air. My clothes were soaked with rain and sweat. Mud was caked on my boots and pants. I just sat there, breathing, trying to get my heart rate under control. Then I jammed the key in the ignition and cranked the engine. The roar of the diesel V8 was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. It was loud and mechanical and real. I didn't bother turning around. I just threw it in reverse and backed down the muddy spur road as fast as I dared, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. The woods watched me go, dark and silent. When I hit the main gravel road, I stopped the truck. I had to. I was shaking too hard to drive properly. I just put it in park and rested my forehead on the steering wheel. The plastic was cold against my skin. I tried to process what I had seen. A mother and her child, an injured baby, a rescue. It was a scene that plays out in nature 1,000,000 times a day. But this wasn't nature as I knew it. This was something else. This was a monster from a storybook, a creature from a nightmare, and it had shown a level of intelligence and restraint that was more terrifying than any mindless aggression could ever be. She could have killed me. I knew that with every fiber of my being. She chose not to. Why? Because I didn't have my rifle? Because I didn't act like a threat? Because she had a more pressing need in that moment? I'll never know. But the fact that she made a choice, that she evaluated the situation and acted accordingly, is the part that haunts me the most. It wasn't just a beast. It was a thinking being. I drove back to the co-op office in a daze. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost. My boss, a guy named Dave, took one look at me and asked if I was okay. I just mumbled something about feeling sick and went home. I didn't tell him I'd left $10,000 worth of survey equipment in the middle of the woods.
Later that evening, after a long, hot shower that did nothing to wash away the feeling of being watched, I tried to tell my wife, Martha. I sat at the kitchen table while she made dinner, and I tried to put it into words. I told her about the silence, the smell, the creature in the ditch, the broken leg. I told her about the mother. She listened patiently, but I could see the look in her eyes. It was a mixture of concern and disbelief. She thought I was overtired, that I'd seen a mangy bear and my imagination had run away with me. She suggested I take a few days off. The next morning, I called the county sheriff's department. I felt like an idiot doing it, but I also felt like I had to. What if it was still out there? What if some hiker or hunter stumbled upon it? I reported a sighting of a large, aggressive, and unidentified animal. I was vague.
I didn't use the word dogman or werewolf. I just said it was like a wolf, but it stood on two legs and was bigger than any bear I'd ever seen. The dispatcher sounded bored. She said she'd send a deputy out when one was free. Deputy Miller showed up at my house that afternoon. He was young, maybe 25, with a fresh haircut and an earnest expression. He listened to my story, nodding politely. I told him where to find the ravine. I told him about the tracks. I didn't tell him about the equipment I'd abandoned. I was too embarrassed. He wrote it all down in his little notebook. "All right, Mr. Peterson," he said, closing the notebook. "So, a big, wolf-like animal, possibly injured, acting aggressively. You think it might have been a cub with its mother?" I just nodded. Something like that. He gave me a reassuring smile. "Probably a black bear. They can look real strange when they're spooked or suffering from mange, and they're protective of their cubs. We'll take a drive up that way, have a look around. Thanks for the call." I knew he didn't believe me. To him, I was just another local with a tall tale. 2 days later, Dave from the co-op called. A timber crew had found my total station and tripod near the washout. They'd brought it in. Dave was relieved, but confused. "Frank, what the hell happened? You just left it out there?" I told him I'd been chased by a bear. It was a lie, but it was a lie people could understand. It fit in their box. He accepted it, told me to be more careful, and that was that. The official story became, Frank got spooked by a bear. No one ever asked me about it again. Deputy Miller never called back. The world went on, and my experience was filed away under unexplained, a story to be dismissed and forgotten by everyone but me. The incident changed me. I used to love the woods. It was my office, my sanctuary. Now, I can't go in them alone. I finished my career doing office work, plotting lines on a computer screen, much to Dave's confusion. I took an early retirement. The silence of the forest is no longer peaceful to me. It's menacing. Every shadow holds a potential threat. Every strange smell sends a jolt of fear through me. I have nightmares. Not the screaming, thrashing kind. They're quiet nightmares. I'm back in that ravine, and the mother is just standing there on the ridge, watching me. Her yellow eyes are filled with that cold, ancient intelligence. She never moves. She just watches. And I can't move either. I'm just frozen, waiting. I've tried to find answers. I've spent hundreds of hours online, typing phrases like upright walking canine and wolf-like creature with hands into search engines. I found the stories, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, and the one that fit the best, the Dogman. The accounts are from all over the country, all over the world, people describing the same thing I saw, the same impossible anatomy, the same yellow eyes, the same terrifying intelligence. Reading them didn't make me feel better. It made me feel worse. It meant I wasn't crazy. It meant the thing I saw was real. It meant there's a whole other world, a shadow biosphere, living in the margins of our own, and we are blissfully, dangerously unaware of it. I think about the mother's gesture, that command to move. I think about her decision not to kill me. It wasn't an act of kindness, I am sure of that. It was an act of pragmatism. I was an obstacle, and she chose the most efficient way to remove that obstacle without escalating the situation.
She had her injured child to worry about. A fight with me would have taken time and energy and carried a risk, however small. My .30-06 was still a threat. So she made a calculated decision. She communicated a command, and I obeyed. The interaction was on her terms, not mine. I wasn't a man encountering a wild animal. I was an ant that had wandered into the path of a god. And the god, in that moment, couldn't be bothered to step on me. That is a profoundly humbling and terrifying realization. It shrinks your world. It makes you understand your true place in the grand scheme of things. And it's not at the top of the food chain. So why am I telling you this now, all these years later? It's not for fame. God knows I don't want that. It's because I carry this weight, this knowledge, and I feel like I have to put it down somewhere. I have to tell someone who might actually listen, who might understand that the world isn't as neat and tidy as we pretend it is.
There are things in the deep woods, in the dark places, that predate our understanding. Things that are powerful, intelligent, and utterly indifferent to our existence, unless we get in their way. My advice, for what it's worth, is to trust your instincts. If you're out in the wild and the birds go quiet, leave. Don't be a hero. Don't be stubborn. Just turn around and walk away. Your gut knows things your brain won't accept. The world is full of boxes we use to categorize our experiences. Animal, human, myth. But what I saw that day didn't fit in any box. It was something that broke all the rules. And the most terrifying part, the part that keeps me awake at night, is that it let me go. I'm alive because a monster decided I was not worth the effort to kill. I look out at the woods behind my house sometimes, the woods that border the national forest, and I wonder if she's out there. I wonder if the little one survived, if its leg healed.
I wonder if it grew up to be as big and as terrifying as its mother. I don't know, and I don't ever want to find out. I just know that I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. I was a witness to a moment of life in a world that runs parallel to our own, a world that is older, wilder, and far more dangerous than we can imagine. And I got a pass. This one time. I don't expect to get another.